Hey, everybody. Hey. Happy, what's today? Wednesday. Happy Wednesday to all of you guys. Thank you for being here. Thank you for hanging out with me today. If you are on here, please get those likes up. Get those likes up. Tag anybody on this discussion or share it with someone that you think may find it interesting. Also, if you would like to show support to the show, you can do so. You can find me on Cash App or Venmo, Sade. Also, super chats are open. I will be sure to acknowledge and read all super chats. So, just to get right into today's topic, you may have already seen me share something on the community tab, right? Regarding this whole idea of why white men should consider marrying Black women. Now, truth be told, y'all, the article that I'm going to reference, actually, it was switched. The article actually said why Black women should consider marrying white men. So we're going to go into that. But I chose to switch the name of the title for a couple of reasons. And I'm going to get into it after we start to read, because there's a lot of things I want to unpack behind this entire idea. I found the article problematic at best. There's a few things that I think are really, that I take issue with. And I feel like it's something that I wanted to address, because this wasn't just, this wasn't, like I said, just some random blog. We're talking a Stanford professor who was sharing this. I saw it being shared on the Stanford Law blog, and it was talked about in the New York Post. So this is getting some pretty wide, it's getting a lot of viewership at the very least. And so that's why I felt like it was relevant to address, because, whether we like it or not, the message is getting out there. So again, y'all, if you're on here, get those likes up. Shout out to everybody in the building. Hey, what's up, JoJo? I see you here. Thanks again for your support, JoJo. You are such a great supporter. And all of you guys, I appreciate you. I appreciate you for being here. So I'm gonna bring up the article, y'all. We're gonna get into it. Okay. Yeah, I see it's all realistic option for 88% of them. Yeah, yo, we got a lot to unpack here. We got a lot to unpack. But instead of me trying to explain it to you, I think it's gonna be better right from the horse's mouth. Let me bring this up. Okay. All right. So this is the article that I want to unpack a little bit. It was shared on the New York Post, and it reads, "Why More Black Women Should Consider Marrying White Men" by Ralph Richard Banks. He is the one that wrote that book, Is Marriage for White People? Or I think it was Is Marriage for White People. I actually think I might do a book review on that, because this article, in my humble opinion, just sounds like basically buy my book. It sounds like a promo post for buy my book, but I digress. So let's get into it. Hey, what's up, Kevin C? Yeah, it's been a minute. Well, thank you for being here. Also, guys, if you like this show, get those likes up. Also, feel free to show support to the show. You can find me on Cash App or Venmo. Shares for day. Also, super chats are open. So, what does Mr. Ralph Richard Banks say? This is his opinion, but nevertheless, he thought so strongly this opinion, he wanted to publish it in the New York Post, and also, guys, in the Stanford Law blog website. I saw that he posted it there and then linked to this. So it reads, okay, two of the most powerful positions in the United States government will soon be held for the first time by Black women: Kamala Harris and Ketanji Brown Jackson. Now, I know some may consider Kamala a preference because she's mixed. Nevertheless, most people consider her a Black woman. Harris, as we all know, is the Vice President of the United States, and Brown Jackson could soon become a Supreme Court Justice. Again, very powerful positions, very influential positions, no doubt. We continue. But Harris and Brown Jackson also share a personal attribute that is equally noteworthy. Each has a white husband. This fact is significant. The effects of racism have left well-educated Black women with a paucity of Black male partners. According to Brookings Institute data, Black men are less likely than Black women to have completed high school and 50% less likely to have attained a 4-year college degree. Yet, despite the shortage of suitable Black partners, Black women have also been the least likely of any minority group to marry outside of the race, according to the data from the Pew Research Center. Okay, guys, so let's just hang out here for a little bit. A lot to unpack here. So it's interesting because here he calls out the effects of racism. So we already know who created the racist system. Black people did not sit down and create the racist system. This is obvious, okay? We know this is a white-dominated society. This is not surprising to anyone. So it's interesting how he acknowledges that in this article, but then now uses that as a reason for Black women to essentially marry the people, or marry into the people group that are responsible for the system that he says makes Black women susceptible to singleness. Like, y'all, did you see that? Did I miss that? Or, I mean, am I the only one that's seeing that? Like, you literally see in the article, he's like, oh, because of the racist system, Black women, aren't married, yada, 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 therefore marry white men who ancestors are responsible for the system. Like, does that not make any sense to you? Already, I thought that framing was kind of bad. Like, if that's going to be the reason, if that's going to be your reason that Black women should do it, like, I just thought that framing was horrible. But let me get back into that. So that is his reasoning. Black women live in a racist system, yada, yada, yada. And then it says, according to the Brookings Institute data, Black men are less likely than Black women to have completed high school and 50% less likely to have attained a 4-year college degree. Now, I'll have to look a little bit more deeply into that. I didn't see any reference to Brookings, but what we do know about education in general is that across the board, across all ethnic groups, women generally hold more, they're just generally more educated. This is true across the board. Black women, do they have more degrees than Black men? Yes, to a certain extent, but also they have a lot more college debt. But what he said right here, especially post-feminism, is something that kind of impacts all men of all ethnic groups. I know there's references over the last, I think decade or so in general, that I've talked about the decline of just men going into some of these different educational institutions, largely because of, for multiple reasons, some of it being due to feminism, some of it being due to different things. But across the board, we are seeing men going into education, that being impacted. So that's that he pulled out there when he's looking at college in relation to men or women. Again, that is something that impacts all ethnic groups. So I don't necessarily understand why that was something to be used as a reason to date and marry out. My perspective. Now this is to me where I thought we're starting to get again a little bit into the propaganda. It says, yet despite the shortage of suitable Black partners. So again, let's start. How do we define suitable? How many of you guys have heard this? I can't find men on my level. I can't find men, on my level. I can't find men who are worth it, yada, 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 yada. We always hear about men not leveling up, men not being suitable enough. We always hear that. Why do we never hear it the other way around? There's always a question of what it means to be a suitable man, but there's never a question about what it means to be a suitable woman. And why are we assuming, if you've already established, according to that article, if you've already established that, Black women are impacted by a racist system, according to what he said there, if we've already established that, how can we assume that now, therefore, the Black men are unsuitable, but the women also are not unsuitable? How can we assume that? We're acting like as if the system didn't impact Black women. We're acting as if Black women and Black men didn't grow up in the same homes. How can we assume that? So again, this whole question around who is suitable, what does it mean to be suitable? How do we define that? To me, it's always very unclear. It is always very unclear. And I think the reason for that is largely because when you don't really establish something and it's not clearly defined as what suitable means, then you're left to fill it in based upon your own narrative. And many of us know that we do live in a society where misandry is it's a very popular talking point, and you're not going to get a lot of pushback. If you talk negatively about a man, especially if you talk negatively about a Black man, nobody's ever really going to say anything. That's accepted. But if it's Black woman, there's going to be more pushback. If it's women in general, if it's women's looks, whatever it means, there's going to be a lot of pushback. So it's not necessarily equal when it comes to some of these different dynamics. But again, going back to this topic of suitable, how do you define that? How do you define suitable? And I think the fact that that's never defined to me is because I think we want to leave it nebulous. We want to leave it unclear so that we can again make it about narrative versus making it about what is actually going on. And this kind of, again, propaganda, I call it propaganda because I don't think it's looking necessarily at the full picture. Can we say that Black men are in some areas, yeah, we're seeing them being negatively impacted? Absolutely. We can absolutely say that. We can also say that there's ways in Black women are being negatively impacted. But when we only focus on the men and we overlook what's happening on women and make it seem as if they are the assumption, right, is that they are outperforming or overperforming at the expense of their men, that is when it gets into propaganda, largely because we're not looking at the overall picture. Again, if we want to say that Black women are also getting more educations, great. Let's also talk about the fact that they have a lot more debt. Also, they tend to have less assets. Black men still tend to hold more wealth. Let's talk about that, because that would also weigh into the factor of what is suitable. Let's talk about single parenthoods. Who is holding more, who is having more children out of wedlock? Who's getting married more? All those things are going to weigh in what is being a suitable partner. Let's talk about maybe health, obesity. I think that would start to be a more honest discussion about what is a suitable partner. I'm not a sociologist, so I don't pretend to be an expert at this, but I think when you're trying to make a sociological argument, and then essentially say, hey, this people group would be better if they essentially, whether it's divest or moved away from their own people group and went to this one. It's like, I think he should have a little bit more evidence than perhaps a study that at best we know is skewed and at best we know is short-sighted, in your opinion. That, you know, and again, that's just me. Shout out to Blackistan in the building. I see, yeah, he's making a class argument. This is intraracial class warfare animated by gender. He sounds white racist. Forget racism, just level up to white. Shout out to Blackistan. You always have good stuff to say. Always have good stuff to say. And you're right. What he's talking about is this is a class. This is definitely a class thing. And again, this article right now is assuming that there's a lot of Black women who are just overwhelmingly in the middle or upper class. That is not true when we look at the numbers. It strictly is not true when we look. That's not what's happening. When you all across the board, you know what I mean? You're looking at you're controlled for class, et cetera, et cetera. Men generally are still making more than women. If that wasn't the case, then feminism wouldn't be a thing, and we wouldn't still see there being advocacy for equal rights, equal pay, things like that. So, again, to just act as if all these Black women are just passing by men in just leaps and bounds, and there's this entire overwhelming majority of women who can't find suitable men, and we don't define what suitable looks like. Again, I think this is a very disingenuous argument. I find it very disingenuous, and I was honestly very problematic. But I want to move on, actually, and I want to move on to this because this is the kind of stuff. What's interesting about this is that this is the kind of stuff we're seeing come out of academia. This is not just some random guy. He's an author. Okay, he is a Stanford professor. Now, he's not a sociologist, as I said. He is a Stanford professor in law, right? In law. So obviously he knows how to argue a point. We could surmise that. At the very least, he probably knows how to argue a point. He probably knows how to state a point. But his degree is not in sociology. So I see Obsidian. Shout out to Obsidian. I think he's in the building. He says, Shay Charday, Banks isn't being honest. I have the proof. Oh, do you? I'd be curious if you would like to share it, because already based upon what I've read and what I've seen, it just doesn't add up. It just doesn't. To me, this is sounding like pandering 101. I haven't even read the whole article. The first paragraph to me is just like pandering 101. Again, not talking about what it even means to be a suitable partner, only focusing on the men and not talking about all the things where women, if we want to go there, where women are not measuring up, because that is happening. Not looking at the wealth, right? Not looking at the single parenthood, right? Not looking at who's marrying, not looking at, debt, not looking at all those things that would actually impact marriageability, overlooking that, citing maybe one or two very vague stats at best and filling it with narrative. To me, that is just propaganda 101. And again, why is this problematic? Because this is the kind of stuff we see coming out of academia. This is not just some random person. This is a Stanford professor that by his very position, you'd think, oh, this man knows what he's talking about. This man knows what he's meaning. I'm sure he's a smart guy. I'm sure he has a lot to say about law. But again, just because somebody has a degree or has an education doesn't necessarily mean that they are the authority on that subject matter. My dad, for an example, my dad is a professor. He worked at UC Berkeley for almost 2 decades, which is, interestingly enough, that's the rival of Stanford, if you don't know. But he worked there, right? Now he's a professor in music. So if he just came and all of a sudden wrote an article and said, I don't know, here's how to build the best building out of steel, you know what I mean? Or he wrote a book about engineering, he might be unqualified for that. He is a professor, yes, but he's a professor in music. He's a professor in choral. He doesn't necessarily have all of the technical understanding to know how to apply that to engineering. And so I think it's important to understand that just because somebody leads with their degree or leads with their education status does not necessarily mean that they are the expert on that subject. And like I said, me not even being a sociologist, me not even being an expert in any of this stuff, I'm looking at this and I'm just like, this just seems like somebody who's pandering to common talking points that many of us women have heard, just in order to try to sell some books, y'all. That's just my perspective. That is my perspective. So, but I want to move on a little bit. Also, shout out to Better You with the 5 on the 5 on the super chat. I see it's always one of your own is always sent to sow the seeds of discord amongst our people. Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I could yeah, you see the weight, the weaves. Yeah, again, you're probably talking about over here, you're talking about suitable. We're always assuming that the men are unsuitable, and there's no definition about what it means for women to be suitable. That's the problem with that whole narrative. Okay, I see. I'm going to say, let me know when you open up the panel. Okay, absolutely. I'm gonna I have a few more things I'm gonna go over in the next few minutes, and then I'll be happy to have you hop on. Shout out to John Ivy with the 5 on the super sticker. I appreciate you. So, okay, I want to move on a little bit. To this. Let me pull it up. Okay, so again, now he's talking about shortage. It's not suitable. I mean, whatever. Citing Pew Research. Interesting how he's not citing the U.S. Census Bureau. I mean, if we really want to get into marriage stats, I think it would be better to look at the actual Census Bureau versus, Pew Research, which we know it's well known to have its own flaws. It's not a perfect resource. No, Brookshaw's a perfect research. I will say this. This is why I think when you're looking at a particular topic, it's always good to take as many sources in as possible. Now, I know there's certain things where you just don't have as much research, so you can only work with what you have. But when it's coming to marriage rates, when it's coming to, single parented, like there's a lot of resources on that. So just pulling some random study, not comparing it against other things, not looking at the full picture, not turning to the Census Bureau, not looking at trends maybe over the last few years, decades even, again, that can cause us to come to all these erroneous conclusions. There's reasons that there are actual think tanks that are dedicated to studying populations and analysis, because it really is a complicated thing. And I think it also requires a lot of skill. And again, that's what I'm saying. Here we're seeing the resources provided, I think, are I think they're problematic at best. Oh, okay, I'll move on. So it says here, rather than partner with men of other races, many heterosexual Black women either don't marry or marry Black men with whom they are not especially well matched. Based upon what? How do you define what is well matched? How do we define that? Again, the assumption here is that Black women are automatically suitable. That is the assumption. The assumption is that Black women and Black men grew up under the same roof, under the same conditions to a certain extent, but somehow Black women weren't affected and Black men were. In what universe does that happen? Anyways. Okay, and then it says, as these mismatched relationships contribute to African Americans having the highest divorce rate of any racial group, again, based upon what evidence? Who is the one that actually initiates the majority of divorce? It's women. In fact, Black women are the only demographics to have a higher divorce rate than marriage rate. So, you know what's interesting there? So Black women are the one to have the highest divorce rate, but somehow it's the man's fault. It is the man's fault that Black women in general tend to initiate more divorces. It's the man's fault. It is the man's fault that somehow Black women are not married. Okay. It is the man's fault that they have the higher divorce rate than marriage rate. How in one instance are women strong and independent and they can make their own decisions, and then on the other hand, it is the man's fault? Like, that just doesn't make any sense. And again, this is where I think we get into pandering. It's okay to have your opinion. He did say this is opinion post, but I'm like, to me, this just sounds like the popular narrative we've heard over time, making generalities based upon what? Based upon what evidence? Like, can we say that, because Black women aren't finding suitable partners, that's why the divorce rate is? You haven't defined what it means to be suitable. You haven't defined if Black women are even suitable based upon those standards. And then now we're coming to all these conclusions. Y'all, if you're on here, get those lights up. Also, shout out to Philip J with the, let me see. Hey, where'd you go? I'm trying to get you as you come in. Yeah, shout out to Philip J. I see buy a dog dollar. Stop. Buy a dog dollar. Where'd you go? Okay. Anyways, I'm gonna find you. I'll say I can't stay, but a little something for the collection plate. I appreciate you, Philip J. I always do. I always appreciate the love and support. Y'all, if you're on here, get those likes up. Tag anybody, share this with someone that you think may find it interesting. Also, shout out to Clemente Calloway with the 5 on the Cash App. Thank you. But let me try to power through this. So again, we're not defining. It's the man's fault that Black women have a higher divorce rate than a marriage rate, and it is also the man's fault that these relationships are unmatched. Although we haven't defined what it even means to be matched. We haven't defined that. Now here's where we get into the pitch, y'all. This is what I think this entire thing is about. It says, a bit more than a decade ago, I published a book, Is Marriage for White People, that examined the decline in marriage across American society, and especially among African Americans, and focused in particular on the predicament of Black women. The book raises the possibility that Black women like Harrison Brown Jackson would do well to open themselves to partner with men who are not Black. After all, Black men appear to have no problem marrying out. That same Pew report revealed they are twice as likely as Black women to have a non-Black spouse. So here's where I think the BS just gets to a whole new level, y'all. Let me pull this up. This is where I think it gets to a whole new level. Because, let's pull this up. So here, pitching the book, which, like I said, I think that in and of itself, I think I'm going to have to do a book review on that at this point. So it says it examined the decline in marriage across American society among African Americans. Let me see. Yeah, so it says it raises the possibility that Black women like Harrison Brown Jackson would do well to open themselves to partnering with men who are not Black. This assumes that Black women have not been open to interracial marriages. This assumes that Black people have not been open to interracial marriages. By and large, we, I think, are the most accepting of interracial marriages. Why? Because if you look at where we rank socially, generally speaking, we are considered the bottom of the social class. Now, we can argue back and forth individually. Yes, of course, a person can rise. Of course, there are successful Black people. But by and large, you talk to Asian people, you talk to Indian people, you talk to certain white people, you talk to Latino people, especially if they're coming from wealth. Marrying a Black person is not generally seen as a level up. Unless maybe they have wealth or class or status, generally marrying a Black person is not seen as a level up. I have talked to friends in confidence. I mentioned this before. I have a Chinese friend who told me her mom was like, if you bring a Black person home, you may lose your inheritance. You bring a white guy home, not a problem. So it's like, so of course, Black people from a social standpoint are generally more open to that. Black women have been open to marrying and being in a relationship with white men since the beginning of this nation was established. Don't believe me? Look at Daughters of the Trade. I always hear this whole narrative that Black women are just so loyal to a fault, and we've always been so loyal, and these men have taken advantage of us. And I'm like, history does not bear that out. How do you justify and how do you explain the Daughters of the Trade? How do you explain the Black women who sold out their own kin, their own people group, and collaborated with the West, collaborated with imperialists in order to get more wealth? They sold their people out. They specifically intermarried. They specifically intermarried so that they could get more access. They can get more trade. Like, this is historically documented. So to act as if for hundreds of years, Black women have not either been intermarrying or at the very least having interracial sex, interracial relationships. I think it's W. Dubois I think it was W. Dubois. I have to go back and see, but one of the sociologists who was talking about, there's historical reports of Black women having sex with the KKK back in the Jim Crow area, doing these different things. Loving versus Virginia. Like, we can't act as if all these years, these Black women have been turning down eligible white men who have been proposing to them and saying, oh, yeah, I know you're high value man. Oh, I know you have a good job. Oh, I know you're marriage material, but I can't marry you because you're white. Please show me an example, y'all. Please show me an example where that has happened en masse. Please. So again, I'm like, okay, stop the cap, because this assumes that Black women have not been talking about dating and marrying out for years, and they have. They literally have. Divesting, what we have now, is just a new generation, a new breed of an ideology that has been going on for centuries. You don't believe me? We can talk about it, a whole different definition. But history speaks to this fact. So that's why I'm just like, already, that's a false premise. You're making it seem like this is some new idea. It's not. And then, and this is where I think that the issue gets really problematic. If we really wanted to make it to where more women, more Black women were marrying non-Black men, were marrying white men in particular, because that's what we calls out in this book. If we want to get it to where more Black women are marrying white men, you have got to talk to the men. Men are the one that control access to marriage. We know this. Men are the one who control access to marriage. Unless there is going to be a time and there's going to be a movement where women say, you know what, forget it. I'm going to be the one to propose. I'm going to be the one to buy the ring. I'm going to be the one to plan the engagement. I'm going to be the one to set it up to surprise him. Unless we create a movement where that happens, and then, the man accepts, but unless that becomes socially acceptable, we all know 95% of the time, the woman is waiting on the man to propose. So if this is an honest, serious discussion, this whole article would be dedicated to white men. This is why I changed the title to More White Men Should Consider Black Women. Because if this is a serious discussion, it would be addressed to the man first, because he is the one who largely in this dynamic of marriage is the one that has the upper hand. We all know this. Let's not beat around the bush. And I think this is another false premise of this, and rather offensive premise of this entire article, is that it kind of puts women in this false position of power. Some puts them, I feel like, almost in a masculine form, like saying like, oh, Ketanji Brown, Kamala Harris, they had these supportive white husbands that were around them, that were supporting them, and as they were gaining power, like it kind of puts them in this very kind of like, I don't know if it's simpish, but kind of like weak supporting role that I think honestly is very offensive, just me personally. And again, it assumes that the women are the one who hold the power in that dynamic. And of course, a woman, yes, does have to receive an engagement, but a man generally has to propose. He's the one that's kind of controlling that conversation. And this is the thing that is not being addressed. They're acting like women are the ones who are proposing. They're the ones who are turning down all these marriage proposals. I'm like, please show me where this has been the case. Please show me. Shout out to JoJo with the 5 on the super chat. I see just doing the drive-by. Hey, Shay in the chat. I will be catch the replay. Got some business to take care of and be one. Shout out to JoJo, always showing some love and support. So again, I found that really offensive also. And also, y'all, it just makes us seem kind of desperate. I ain't gonna lie to nobody. Okay. So yeah, so again, he goes into that, which I think is a false premise, acting like Black women haven't been open to intermarriage relationships since the beginning of the nation, which is not true. We have. It's just I don't think we've necessarily been. We haven't been a hot commodity. And then acting as if women are the ones who control the access to the marriage. They don't. The men do. We all know this. If that was the case, women wouldn't be outraged and doing, thousands of lies every time we see a woman propose to a man. How much outrage do we see anytime a woman proposes to a man? How much outrage do we see? We see it all the time. All the time. So I continue. It says, okay, my book generated considerable controversy, yada, yada. I'm going to move on because it did. It's some controversy, of course. And then he says, but the most significant feature was between Black men and women. While some Black women were made uncomfortable by the book and the way they put them in the spotlight, many others embraced its message of empowerment. How was this empowering? That was a message that not all Black men wanted to hear. And y'all, honestly, let me just say this. I don't know many of y'all, correct if I'm wrong, but I don't know many of Black men who are threatened of the idea of women marrying out or Black women marrying out. I think generally that's accepted and in some cases expected. So I don't know men who are generally crying in their cars or in their room privately because a Black woman is marrying. I don't think that's really that big of a deal. Now, what is the issue, and what my issue is when this now becomes a reason for you to spread propaganda and lies and pander to women. That's my biggest issue with this whole thing. I'm like, marry and date whoever you want to. Please do that. Nobody cares about that. Like, if you love the person and they love you, you guys can get along together and work together. Great, have at it. But why you got to go and spread propaganda? Why you got to go and I think just feed into old false narrative that is not going to actually address the issue? Like I said, if this isn't addressed to the men and there's not other conversations about, okay, well, white men, you should consider Black women and here's how, and you were able to convince them, and then we don't actually address some of the things that are impacting Black women and getting it to where they're not necessarily as hot commodities when it looks to the marriage market, without actually addressing those things, then we're just pandering. We're just getting book sales. And I think that's what's happening here, because it's not addressing the real issues. It's not addressing the real issues. But like I said, you're going to have some women who read this, I think, and maybe feel emotionally empowered. You're going to have men who look at this and be like, I don't really care. This is just pandering. And I think this is what you have in this case. So it says other critics, including some Black women, contended that white racism precluded Black women from finding non-Black partners. And this convinced many Black women that they cannot or should not partner with a non-Black man, even if the alternative was remaining unpartnered or in a bad relationship. As a result, many Black women feel that they should marry down before they marry out. And again, this entire premise of this study assumes that there are not suitable Black men. Because it's creating this whole dynamic where it's just like there's an overwhelming amount of suitable, eligible, lovely, educated, attractive, emotionally, spiritually well Black women, and there is this huge deficit of Black men, and that either a Black woman has to marry a Pookie and Ray Ray, she can only marry a Pookie Ray Ray, or she can marry out, as if that's the only options. No talk of the over 50% of Black men who are single and childless. Let's not talk about that. No talk of the overwhelming majority of Black men who do make it in the middle class. Let's not talk about that. Let's not talk about the educated man. Let's not talk about the fact that, yes, there are still more Black male entrepreneurs than Black female entrepreneurs, although we see the increase among Black female entrepreneurs, but no talk about that. No talk about the fact that men still hold more wealth and they still have less debt. If we really want to do apples to oranges comparison, no talk about that. Let's just assume that all the men are just all these dusty Pookies and Ray Rays, and all the women are bossing up, leveling up, and their only option is to marry white. This also assumes that white men are not struggling. Because I'm like, and this is again where I think it's like, what are we even talking to? Because this also assumes that just because a person is white, that they don't have financial struggles, that they don't have struggles with employment. I know plenty of white people, even plenty of white guys that have had issues trying to find, in the pandemic, finding work. You know what I mean? Having a hard time moving from place to place. This is why we're seeing things become more radicalized. Generally, when a country becomes more radicalized and we start to see people, whether it's tribalism, increase of tribalism, however it happens, it's because there's economic instability. We're seeing this hit all across the board. So again, this assumes that if you just pick a random white guy off the street, he's going to be somehow high value. False premise. Propaganda. Pandering to women, females, pandering to the BS that we've all heard for how many decades. This isn't new. I just got frustrated because I'm just like, this is the kind of stuff that doesn't help us. This is not getting to the root issue. This is not getting to the root cause. And this is coming out of academia. What the heck? Like, what is going on? Anyways, we're getting to the end here. So again, false premise. Then he looks at, was it Jodie Foster or no, Foster? I made that up. Jodie Turner Smith, which, by the way, y'all, she did propose. She proposed to him. He's older, and I think by if I'm not mistaken, financially makes more, if I'm not mistaken. But either way, she proposed, and he made that very, very clear. But he uses a picture of them. Most women wouldn't want to propose. Most women wouldn't want to do what she had to do: propose to an older man who has more money and arguably more status. Most women wouldn't want to do that. She did. Are women willing to do that? If they are, I have no problem with it. Let me see. I can pull that up. Also, guys, y'all, if you're on here, get those likes up. Likes are free. Also, show some support to the show. You can find me on Cash App or Venmo, Shay Sharday. Also, super chats are open. I will be sure to acknowledge all super chats. So then he goes on to say, I explained in the book why Black women should not be pressured to sacrifice their own chances for happiness out of some misplaced loyalty to Black men. Again, false premise. There has never been a time in history where there has not been, at the very least, a small group of women who have not been willing to sell their own people out for their own financial benefit. If that wasn't the case, we wouldn't actually have entire historical narratives dedicated to those women who sold their people out into slavery to get money. This has been happening for hundreds of years. False premise. This has happened. There has always been women, and to this day, there are women who are willing to be loyal to themselves and their pocketbooks only. So why are we painting this false narrative? All these women are just loyal to a fault to all these men, when they also are the ones that initiate divorce at a much higher rate. Again, false premise. Because nor should Black women feel beholden to Black men under the guise of advancing the race. If the price of racial solidarity is a bad, intimate relationship, then the cost is too high. Black women should not be held hostage to the struggles of Black men. Pander, pander, pander. Oh God, to me, this is just like the pandering is at another level. Like, I literally felt like a woman wrote this article and then he just put his name at the bottom. Because I'm like, every single thing that I have heard, women, all the narratives that I have heard, me being told, a lot of you detractors who are in the comments being told, all this being told for the last decade, like, this is it. And I'm like, it's crazy because I'm like, this is sounding coming from a Black man, by the way, who was married to a Black woman. Very interesting that his wife didn't take his own advice, but nevertheless, there we go. It says, true, race can provide a basis of compatibility, but race itself cannot solely sustain a relationship, and there are many bases of compatibility other than race. Black women's increased rate of interracial marriage from a mere 3% in 1980 to 12% in 2017, according to the Pew Research Center, also reflects their increasing autonomy to choose partners that best serve them. They should not have to apologize or guilt for doing so. Again, nobody is saying that you shouldn't date or marry out. Have never said that. Also, that stat, if I'm understanding, is largely taken out of context, but I'd have to go do my research before I can. But either way, even if we want to assume that's true, we know over 90% of Black women right now who are married have a Black husband. It's higher than 90%, but at the very least 90% of Black women who are married have a Black husband. Interracial is still rather low. But even if we do assume that it is true, no one cares. No one is putting a knife to the throat of Black women at large and saying, you have to marry the Pookies and the Ray Rays. You have to marry the 15% of Black men who are making all these kids with multiple women. And you have to overlook all of the 50% of Black men who are single and childless. And you have to only choose the struggle dusty bandits, right? Or else you're a race traitor. Nobody is doing that. Again, why is the assumption? Why is the assumption that Black men are doing so horribly, that Black women are doing so great, and that their only option is to marry into white men that, by the way, he alludes to is responsible for the issue that they have? Like, again, the logic is not here, which is why I think this has to be pandering, because this guy is a Stanford Law professor. He's an intelligent gentleman. I don't know if he actually believes his stuff. Because I'm like, the pandering is to a new level that I have not seen. So again, there has been little discussion in the media or culture about the white partners of prominent Black women like Harris or Brown Jackson. Where have you been? And I hope this reflects the increasing social acceptance of such unions. If so, then Black women will be able to enjoy the relationship freedom they deserve. Yeah, that was hard to read. Okay. Y'all. So at the end of the day, I looked through the article, and to me, the bigger issue is that this is the kind of stuff that's coming out of academia, y'all. That's a Stanford professor. Granted, he's not a sociologist, right? I don't think he studies really relationship dynamics or the patterns of entire populations, how they move. That's not his field. He studies law. So this is an opinion poll, but nevertheless, people are going to be enamored by the fact that he has a Stanford, background. And I made this point before. Like I said, my dad, college professor at UC Berkeley. He was there for like 20 years. Very prestigious school. But he was there working in music. If he wrote a book about, mechanical engineering or how to do steel buildings, and it was his opinion, yeah, some people may read and be like, oh, well, he knows what he's doing because he's a professor at UC Berkeley. That's a great accredited school. But he's unqualified to talk about mechanical engineering, because that's not his background. That's what I'm saying. We can all give opinions, that's fine. But I'm looking at him and I'm like, okay, you're a Stanford Law. Yeah, you're a Stanford professor. But are you really qualified to make these claims? Especially when I'm not seeing, from my humble opinion, any statistical evidence, any substantial evidence to support your claims. At the very least, and like I said, just assuming let's just assume everything that you're saying is true. What if we assume that all these men are underperforming? They all have, all these black men around here are creating all these kids with multiple baby mamas. All these black men that, they're not making enough. They're not they're not own businesses. They're struggling. They're on jail. Like, if we just assume all that's true, what's going on with the women? Those women, like it or not, grew up around those men. Those women were byproducts of those men. Those are those women's fathers, brothers, husbands, some of them, boyfriends, cousins, sons. So if we're going to assume that all these men are over here struggling, can we really assume that the women were not impacted? Can we really make the claim that somehow Black women were completely and totally unaffected from the racist system that you yourself identified? Can we really assume that? And what reality and what universe is that true? And what reality and what universe is it true that a people group, a community can live under the same conditions in some capacities under the same roof and neither of them be affected? Like I said, it just doesn't make any sense to me. It just doesn't make any sense. So I was bothered by that. And I think, honestly, it makes us look desperate. It makes us look really desperate because creating this whole narrative that, first of all, okay, the men suck. Let's just say that the men suck. Women over here, the poor Black woman can't find a good man. And so now she's a freaking charity case. And now the white man, out of the goodness of his heart, needs to go save her from Blackistan. Do you know how desperate that makes us look? That's desperate. And honestly, I wouldn't encourage any white men to do that. I wouldn't encourage any white man to go be some savior to a Black woman who's trying to get out of Blackistan. Not if she's coming from those conditions. Not if she's coming from those conditions. I think a man deserves a wife who's going to be an asset, not a liability. And if you've already established that the culture community that these women are coming from is Blackistan and struggle and all these issues and all these single parent and illiterate and whatever you want to be, unsuitable. If they're coming from unsuitable environments, how are they not going to be an asset to a white man? We can all choose the tokenisms. We want to do that. We can choose the Ketanji Bounds in the world and the Kamala Harris, who, like I said, some would argue that she's a preference. She's a preference when it's convenient and when she's a Black woman when it's convenient. It's funny how those things change. But either way, it's like, how would that be a benefit to the man? How is that? If you're trying to convince white, because really, like I said, this article needs to be to white men. If you're trying to convince white men that they need to marry Black women, how is this helping? How? White men don't want liabilities. No men want liabilities. And you at the very least, indirectly have shown that you're doing this, you're marrying into a liability. Because they're not looking at Black women and Black men as separate. They're looking at us as a community, love it or hate it. Now, I know some of us, we try to operate, we do our own thing, we focus on ourselves, we get our own success. That's the best you can do, right? But it's like, the way you're being perceived largely is you're coming from the Black community. They're looking at you as a Black woman, they're thinking somewhere, you're connected to a Black man somehow. So, like I said, if we're out here continuing to create this narrative of how horrible it is for Black people, and please come save this white man, who would do that? Like I said, I wouldn't recommend any white men do that. I think that's horrible. That's a bad deal for him. I'm like, at that point, he should just go marry Becky. It's a bad deal for him, y'all. So, those are my thoughts on it. And, Dr. T. Johnson, he just did a video that I thought recently really spoke to this. Actually, just to make a point, I think I want to bring this up because here is another professor. Now, I think he's actually qualified to speak on this because he's a Black male studies professor. So, like, his emphasis is literally, okay, how Black men are doing. And he speaks on, yet again, some media article. There's some article that went out that was talking about the wealth and entrepreneurship among Black people. And I think I do want to review his commentary briefly, and then I'm going to open up the call lines, because what he says really speaks to this entire idea of narrative and how I think there's narrative being pushed that is not necessarily reflective of reality, and how at the end of the day, that does nothing to actually address or improve Black women's marriage results, period, if that is what we actually want. So I'm going to bring that up because I saw that yesterday, and I thought it was pretty thought this episode was pretty impactful. Y'all, if you're on here, get those likes up. Get those likes up. Tag anybody or share this with someone that you think may find it interesting. Also, cash apps and super chats are open. I will be sure to acknowledge all super chats. I'm going to bring this up. And then after that, I will open up. I may open up the call lines for a few minutes if time permits. Okay, let's see. Wait, where'd you go? Okay. Okay. All right. So I'll have to email him and let him know I'm using his content so it doesn't get flagged. But he did this live yesterday that I thought was actually pretty interesting. In it, he kind of he uses his term. I think it was colonial agents, if that's it. I hope I'm not butchering it. But either way, I'm just going to play it. I'm going to play it, and you guys can listen in. What he's doing right here is he's reviewing this article that recently came up about the increase of wealth among Black Americans. It says Black Americans represent the fastest rising class of business owners. Here's how the 15% pledge aims to help Black entrepreneurs generate $1.4 million in wealth. I would like you to take a very good look at the business owners being the Black American business owners being highlighted in that particular article. I want you to take a look at that. So, and I'm going to play this real briefly, and then we'll get into it. And then, like I said, if time permits, I will open up the call-ins.
This is BusinessInsider.com, and the title of this one came out about 10 hours ago. Is Black Americans represent the fastest rising class of business owners? Here's how the 15% pledge aims to help Black entrepreneurs generate $1.4 trillion. Now, let's be clear. You look at the image, that's how they're defining Black entrepreneurs. Notice anything missing? Okay. I'm not going to go through all of this. I will put the links to all of these in the description so you can read through the articles themselves. But I do want to take you to a couple of key areas. So they say in general, from February 2020 to August 2021, the number of Black entrepreneurs in the U.S. increased by 38%. Right? Now, this is not because everybody just woke up and decided to be business owners. A lot of this is because people were losing jobs. A lot of this had to do with even folks leaving racist environments and trying to use what they knew how to do in their own spaces. But generally, we start businesses with no capital, usually very little to none. 99% of Black women-owned businesses have one employee. I mean, that is what it is. And that's not going to be said here because, they want to provide this celebratory space, but that's the reality of Black entrepreneurship. However.
Right. And I wanted to speak to that real quickly again. He said 99% of those Black-owned businesses by Black women have one employee. So, the Kiki's nails, Jamila's hair, I don't know, Ashley Bay's makeup, and again, hashtag none of that, because those are all, look, I would go to Kiki's nails, shout out to Jamila's hair, wigs, weaves, all of that. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but again, he's trying to paint a picture where it's like, okay, let's have an honest conversation about what Black entrepreneurship means. They're painting as if all these Black women are over here bringing in, net worth in what, 2, 3, 4 multi-million-dollar companies. You're not doing that as Kiki's nails. I'm not saying that, you can't have an honest living, but let's be a little bit realistic about what this means. And let's not paint this picture that just because you start a business means that you're actually going to succeed. The amount of businesses that fail are actually pretty high. I want to say it's at about 70%, if not a little bit more. And again, this isn't, I don't want to be Debbie Downer, but that is actually what's going on. But the way it's painted here, it's celebratory. I'm all for women doing jobs and finding careers that they love, that express their passion, creativity. Great. All for it. But I think we have to be careful at the way this framing goes, because we can quickly start to get into misandry. And again, spreading certain propaganda that at the end of the day starts to undermine even our own progress as Black women. And for sure undermines the progress of Black men.
However, you do have more Black male entrepreneurs than Black female, and we talked about that last year. But strangely enough, there's never a mention of that. What you hear most regularly is that Black women are the fastest growing population. They're starting businesses at a faster rate than any other demographic. But actually, Black men are entrepreneurs in greater numbers, you know. But most of the focus on funding entrepreneurship in the Black community, especially over this last 2 years, has primarily been, gynocentric. Right. So I'll read this portion because this is a section of the article. A focus on Black female entrepreneurs. Have y'all heard of focus on Black male entrepreneurs ever?
No.
Every article I run across that's talking about a new financial, supported measure for entrepreneurship is always focusing on Black female entrepreneurs, as if Black men don't own any businesses whatsoever. Black female entrepreneurs in particular need support and a seat at the wealth building table, Williams Belford said. 2021 report from the Harvard Business Review found that while 17% of Black women in the U.S. were starting or operating new businesses, compared with 10% of white women and 15% of white men, only 3% were running mature companies. Now notice, there was never any mention of Black men there. Not how many businesses they're running, not how much capital they're working with, not what size their businesses are. No mention of Black men whatsoever. The report hypothesized that access to capital could dictate which types of businesses Black women launch, and that without vital funds, they lean toward creating businesses with low margins in crowded and competitive markets. Before 2021, only 93 Black women had raised $1 million or more in venture capital, according to Project Diane, a biennial report on the state of Latina and Black women founders by the organization Digital Undivided. Additionally, it found that Latina and Black women founders received a small percentage of the $166 billion in VC funding raised in 2020. No mention of Black males. They either talk about Black entrepreneurship or Black women. After the murder of George Floyd, many venture capitals committed to increasing capital for Black entrepreneurs, but even with those promises, Black entrepreneurs received 1.3% of the venture capital raised last year, Axios reported in February. Now that is incredibly interesting because this is going to keep coming up tonight. The monetization, both in the nonprofit realm and the entrepreneurial realm, of Black male death. What I call Black andro mortality. Yeah. So they're talking about George Floyd only because it has served as a platform to rationalize increasing the resources that should be extended to Black women entrepreneurs. Does that not sound problematic to anybody? How the fuck do Black men die? But there's no conversation about Black male entrepreneurship. If you're going to have a talk about some type of justice measure, some type of reparative gesture being made to make sure that Black entrepreneurs or Black students or Black nonprofits or Black, whatever, should have an equal shot at opportunity, should there not be some discussion that maybe the demographic that represented, or, when you talk about George Floyd, it comes from a long list of Black men who were killed. Should then there be some discussion about Black men? No. Because BLM laid out the framework in the bait and switch that the only relevant discussion after the death of Black men post-2015 should be the upliftment of Black women. And see, here's the thing. I'm not opposed to Black women being uplifted, but I am opposed to Black women being uplifted at the expense of Black men, at the cost of Black male blood, and yet nobody gives a fuck. I have a problem with that. So why did I pose this article? And we're talking about the underdevelopment and diminishment of Black males. Because this article, although not necessarily written by Black women, is dealing with the issue of the bait and switch, the issue of prioritizing the advancement, the class advancement of Black women at the expense of Black male death. And here's my problem. Even though I know that Black women, even if it was a Black woman that wrote the article, she's an employee at Business Insider. But here's the thing. In the last couple of years, since we've been hearing about this increased support for entrepreneurship to keep mom and pop shops from closing down, all the way to venture capitalism, all this conversation in the last couple of years about supporting Black women, all the billions of dollars that have been earmarked or given outright to Black women, how many of those Black women have organized around the absence of attention toward Black males, most particularly the Black males whose deaths are the cause of this whole new push to advance Black women? Don't worry, I'll wait. Back of the classroom, appreciate that support.
So
Andrew, appreciate that support. You know, it's much appreciated. Y'all like, share, subscribe.
So if you want to check out the whole video, please do. I thought what he pointed out about that particular article was so interesting. Again, mentioned the rise of Black entrepreneurship. No talk of Black men in that. Black women were obviously discussed in there. White women and white men were discussed in there. Black men were not, right? Again, overlooking the fact that Black men still are, by and large, they're more entrepreneurial. They have more businesses than Black women. No mention of that. And just all these different moments where either Black men were either completely taken away from the conversation, or when they were used in the conversation, i.e. referencing their death, again, it was used as a way to uplift Black women exclusively. And so I think this kind of divisive language, that is the biggest issue that I have with this. That is the biggest issue. He pointed to that. I thought he made some really great examples of, again, how it can be used so subtly. You talk about Black entrepreneurship, and Black entrepreneurship is interchangeable with Black women. You only show pictures of Black women, and you do not address the entrepreneur that Black men are doing. You don't even address that. They're not even in the conversation. They're only in the conversation when it talks about their death. He also goes on and mentioned that Black Lives Matter had come over scrutiny for spending all of their money by buying a multi-million dollar home and just buying these lavish things that were really questionable. So I thought it was really, really interesting. But again, this, I think, ties in perfectly to that idea of suitable. So in one instance, we have articles like this. We have narratives like this that are specifically deleting Black men from the conversation and specifically overlooking progress that is done, completely overlooking that. It's also overlooking some of the assistance that women are getting, which I'm all for that. I have no issue with a woman getting assistance. I have no issue with a woman starting a business. I think that's great. But then at the same time, and now we turn around and then say men are unsuitable. And I'm like, that to me is the biggest BS. And that was one of the biggest issues that I saw with that piece that was released from Ralph Richard Bakes. Because it feeds into this narrative and it doesn't address the real issue. And at the end of the day, it's not going to lead to an increase. I don't think those kinds of narratives or those kinds of pieces will really lead to an increase, because at the end of the day, you have to convince white men to propose and marry Black women more. And unless they see that as being a valuable option, right, then we're going to continue to talk about it, and people are going to continue to make money off of it, and you may get views off of it, and you may make women feel good off of it. We may create movements, but it's not necessarily going to move the needle. At least it's not going to move it as fast as we want it to. Not if we keep on pandering and not getting to the real issue. Like I said, no man wants the charity case. Affirmative action doesn't exist when it comes to who a person decides to marry. So either you are a valuable woman, whether you're a Black woman or not, you're a valuable woman personally, and a man sees that, or you're not, period. You're not. And even the whole question of being suitable, are you a suitable woman? If we want to say that Black men aren't suitable men, okay, let's assume that's true. Are you a suitable woman? You grown up under the same environment. Are you a suitable woman? If we really want to go toe to toe and compare stats against stats, I would argue that Black women aren't looking much better. If we really want to do that, I don't think that that's relevant or necessary, but if we really want to do that. So y'all, that's my bigger issue. But anyways, thank you for letting me rant on. Thank you for letting me rant on, guys. Again, if you're on here, get those likes up. Also, please show support to the show if you like what I'm about, if you like what we're doing here. Show support to the show. You can find me on Cash App or Venmo, Shay Charday. Also, super chats are open. So I may briefly leave open the call line. If I get enough support, we will have a nice long discussion. If not, then I will shut this down quickly and move on to other things. So I'm gonna drop this. If you guys have your thoughts on this, feel free to do so. Like I said, I always say I truly think, and I truly am for women going after whoever they want to go after, and women marrying whoever. I think they should absolutely do that. Just don't go hate on your people and undermine others in the process, because actually you could be undermining your own success. And I think that's actually what's happening. So let me get I see MrZBlackneffect. Y'all donate. Y'all, we got 135 people in this building. Y'all can donate. Shout out to Barry Hamilton with the $4.99 on the super sticker. Shout out to you with the super sticker, you guys. I got Obsidian in the building and MrZBlackneffect. I'm gonna add you guys both. This will make for a good discussion. What's going on?
Hey, I'm gonna let Obsidian go first. I'm gonna let him scorch everything, and then I'll come in afterward and try to replant the trees.
Okay. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
What you got?
Yeah. Shay, this is Sade, this is a really good topic, and something I've been having on my docket to do. I don't know if I have to get to it tonight or not, but I want to pick up first where Professor Ketanji Johnson left off. I know Dr. Johnson very well. I also know Professor Ralph Richard Banks' work very well. Got the book when it first came out 10 years ago. I've been trying for years to get him on to have a real-time conversation. He assiduously avoids Black men to discuss these issues. His argument is very flawed from a number of different perspectives. So let's take what Ketanji Johnson said about there doesn't seem to be any real hue and cry about Black male lives, which is ironic. Black lives matter until they're dead. So Professor Banks's premise, and I've read his book, is that as a result of, and he says this in the article, as a result of racism, Black women are pulling ahead further than Black men. So let's take a step back and look at that for a minute. So we know that Black boy, as of 2011, the same year that his book came out, Black boys' reading levels were below proficient grade level. In all of the major cities in the country, including my own hometown of Philly, less than barely 10% of boys could read at grade level. So the question becomes, who's to blame for that? If Black boys, the overwhelming majority of whom have trouble reading at grade level and cannot achieve, because I can tell you who Banks is talking to, but let me do this first. If that's true, then the question becomes, who's to blame for that state of affairs? Who? Now, I say there are two groups who are responsible. First, Black mothers are responsible. As Roland Fryer of Harvard University found, that in the homes where Black boys are, there are only 39 books for children on average. Compare that to white boys, 93. 93. So if Black boys who grow up to be Black men are not suitable mates for Black women, who's to blame for that? Who? So this is the part where Black women don't want to deal with it. They don't want to deal with that part. If the majority of black boys cannot read at grade level, who's to blame? Who runs the public school system in the black precincts? Who is it? Black women work in education more than black men do by a wide margin, particularly primary education. So black women in the home and black women in the schools are to blame. Full stop. Now, let's take it a step further. Because if the argument is indeed, as Banks has propounded, that due to racism, as a matter of fact, I'll directly quote him here so we don't get this all twisted. He says here, the effects of racism have left well-off educated black women with a paucity of black male partners. Stop right there. All right, so if that's true, then I have to ask this question, Sade. Have black women benefited more from the civil rights movement than black men?
I think we could argue that black women have benefited more in many capacities. Now we know statistically white women benefited the most from civil rights. But as far as, I mean, we looked at the whole example with Dr. Tizon Johnson. And he's looking at, loans and the different assistance that is getting for black-owned businesses, and we see how that is specifically dealing with black women. I mean, there's so many different examples. So,
okay. So yeah, go ahead.
I think a short answer to that would be yes. I think we could argue yes.
And here's a very simple way of looking at it. George Floyd. If the argument is that police brutality is still a very real thing, then that tells me something went horribly wrong with the civil rights movement. See, the sisters in the chat room want to spread the blame around. Don't worry, ladies. This is where you're going to be able to get your pound of flesh. See, I said when the boys were boys, black women are responsible. Now I want to switch it to the larger scale. The civil rights movement's leadership, which were all black men. Remember, black feminism really got its start on the basis that the black civil rights leadership were sexist. Okay? SNCC, NAACP, and so on. Right? That was the argument. As a matter of fact, the Black Panther Party were groundbreaking in that they had elevated black women to positions of leadership. Elaine Brown, if I remember correctly, is a case in point. She even wrote a memoir about it called A Taste of Power. So, okay. So if indeed racism, right, the effects of racism have been such that while black women have pulled ahead, black men have fallen behind, then I have to ask Professor Ralph Richard Banks, Stanford undergrad, Harvard Law School graduated cum laude, Stanford Law professor. I have to ask him a question. What happened with the civil rights leadership that we have this state of affairs where we have so many black men underperforming? What happened? Something happened. And I ask Professor Banks because whether he wants to admit it or not, he is part of the leadership. Let's be clear about something here. When you are in a position like Banks, you have a duty to see to it that black people succeed. If so many black men are falling behind, he and the rest of the black civil rights leadership have failed. Period. So we have two culprits of failure here. Black women in the home as mothers, black women in the public schools as teachers, when the black men are boys, and the civil rights leadership from the late 1960s to present have failed black men, if we're going to accept Professor Ralph Richard Banks's premise that so many black men have failed and that black women should pull ahead. Let's be clear here. What Banks is proposing isn't what Roland Fryer of Harvard University is proposing, which is taking a hard look at why black boys are failing and coming up with novel ways to deal with that. No, his response is to abandon black boys. That's his position. So we want to make this clear here and take a wild guess as to what has happened to Roland Fryer. He's been ostracized and canceled by fellow black Harvard scholars because he dares to actually try to improve the life of black boys.
I will know this just from, like I said, my dad's worked in the system for years as a professor. He worked at Berkeley, SF State. Now he's a tenure professor, and he's told me personally about the politics on that level and how anyone who is trying to advocate for men, especially black men, have a very, very hard time. So what you just said about him being ostracized, unfortunately, sadly, does not sound surprising to me whatsoever.
Okay, so there's that. Now let's move to the piece about Banks and his book. Like I said, I read his book. I know it very well. If you've read the book, you will run across a character in there known as Celia. Her actual name is Carolyn Edgar, Harvard Law. Went to Harvard Law at the same time as Banks, President Barack Obama, and actor Hill Harper. Okay.
You're drawing a very good line right there, Obsidian.
Okay. Now, the argument was that she had a hard time finding a man on the level. She wound up marrying a construction worker and they got divorced. But what Banks conveniently leaves out about Celia, aka Carolyn Edgar, was that she was fat. And I'm not saying this to be derisive. She described herself as, and I quote, a fried piece of chicken, end of quote. Okay? He overlooked that fact. You see, black men like Banks don't do fat chicks. They don't. Now, they'll never say it because they have to work with black women like this. They have to work with the Stacey Abramses who went to Yale for her JD. But you look at what they do. See, black women love being in denial. Since nobody will actually tell them this, they can continue to believe it. They refuse to go by what they actually see. Black men like Hill Harper and Barack Obama and Ralph Richard Banks, they don't do fat chicks. And there are fat chicks who go to Harvard. There are fat chicks who go to Yale and Spelman and Dartmouth, Shonda Rhimes, etc. et al. You want to know the reason why they don't get married? Because those guys don't do fat chicks. That's why. So one major reason why a lot of these because let's be clear, Banks is talking about the elite. He's talking about elite educated black women.
Shout out to Stacey Abrams.
Yes, I'm about to get to her in a second. He's talking about them. The truth of the matter is that if you're a sister and you went to one of those schools, your chances of getting married and staying married are very high. And if you don't, there's a reason for it. One of those reasons is because you look like Stacey Abrams or Shonda Rhimes or Carolyn Edgar.
Or Professor Crump.
Right.
What are Stacey Abrams and Shonda Rhimes? Aren't they both lesbians? So I don't think they would want to marry men to begin with, but I don't know that.
If that were true, Shonda Rhimes wouldn't be interested in men at all.
Yeah, I don't know about Shonda Rhimes. I think she might be straight, but yeah.
Okay, I could be wrong. I don't know.
Yeah.
I know Stacey Abrams, you know.
Now, Stacey Abrams is interesting because she lost her dream job. According to her, I did my research on her. According to her, running for the State House of Georgia was her dream job. And she lost. And the reason why she lost is very simple. Because she refused to lose weight and get a man. That's what her campaign manager told her. He begged her, please lose the weight, get a man, because Southern women cannot relate to essentially what amounts to a Northeastern type sensibility. If you think about Stacey Abrams, she appeals more to a Northeastern liberal sensibility than to the South. And guess what ended up happening? She lost the white female vote by 65%. 65%. So there it is. These facts are conveniently, and you were right to point this out, Sade, earlier in your monologue. Those facts are conveniently left out by Banks. And I know why he leaves them out. Because black men like that can't say those things without running the risk of being canceled. Without running the risk of running into significant problems. There's another academic, his name is Jeffrey Miller. He got censured for talking about obesity. He was censured, okay, at the University of New Mexico about 9 years ago. So
Obsidian,
these guys can't talk about that.
Also remember to mention to everyone what happened to the sports program at Spelman again?
Oh yeah, shut it down. They shut it down because they had a much bigger problem. It was the problem of obesity.
Thank you.
This is and you know, Spelman is essentially the sister university to Morehouse. So in other words,
wait, you said they shut down the sports program at Spelman because there were so many BBWs.
Yes, and it's in the Washington Post. And you know, because Morehouse is all male and Spelman's all female, they would pair off, right? The women of Spelman and the men of Morehouse, they would pair off. Well, they had to shut it down at Spelman because they're too fat. They had to implement another program instead of a sports program. They had to implement an anti-obesity program to get the women there at Spelman back into shape.
Hey, that's rough.
Now Spelman, if you know HBCU, Spelman is considered like the Wesleyan College of the HBCUs. It's the elite of the elite.
Yeah.
So, you know, as far as HBCUs go. So, and that is where Stacey Abrams went, you know, undergrad. She went to Spelman. Spelman undergrad, MPA from UT Austin, JD from Yale. So when Banks is talking about black women getting with white men, he's talking about black women like Abrams. So we know from white women, Asian women, and Jewish women, when they go to Princeton, Yale, Dartmouth, they meet their man there. They get their Mrs. degree. They meet them either in undergrad or in grad school or shortly thereafter, and they pair off. Mm-hmm. Black women don't do that.
Yeah.
Black women don't go to school to meet a husband, by and large.
Nope.
Particularly at the lower levels, that is to say, at the middling levels of colleges. At the more upper echelons, they tend to pair off at a higher rate. So you have to ask yourself, is it really because there's a lack of eligible bachelors to go around, as Banks would have us believe? Or is it because of other factors that he refuses to talk about, like your weight, like, you know, you didn't make getting a husband a priority when you were in school?
Yeah.
You didn't make it a priority. That's fine. But then when you get out, as shout out to Susan Patton, the Princeton mom, author of the book, Marry Smart, for each passing year out of school that you wait to get a husband, there are fewer and fewer eligible men there. She strongly urges her fellow white and Jewish sisters, younger sisters, if you will, to get their man while they're at a school like Princeton, because never again will you have that many eligible, the best of what America has to offer in terms of men. It'll never happen again in life. That's what she said.
That's and you don't hear that. You hear the opposite. I will say there's a black woman. Like I said, I know I have a lot of people who don't like me because of it, but that's the truth. That's the truth. And it's like, we're not told that. We're actually told the opposite. We're told, you know, go party. You know what I mean? You're too young to settle down. Take your time. Like all this different stuff. Then it's like, okay, if you want to do that, but you can't now 10, 15 years down the line, maybe 50, 60 pounds, 100 pounds overweight, 2 baby daddies under your belt, and then now it's the men's fault. That's not an honest conversation.
No, it's not.
That's not helping anybody.
And not only that, there are no, and I talk about this in my new book, by the way. I do a plug for my own book in which I talk about Banks. I have a chapter in it called The Swirling Wars, the Book of Obsidian, the ladies edition. There's a chapter in it called The Swirling Wars. Yes. And I mentioned Banks prominently in that chapter. And I also mentioned the fact that there are no books by black women, or for that matter, black men, that are like Marry Smart by Susan Patton, or the Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother by I can't remember her name right now. But yeah, there are no books like that. For black women, You need to go live your life and do your thing. And then when you're about 35, start looking for a husband. And I'm sorry, it just doesn't work that. It doesn't work that way. That's not how it works in America. If you go to a prestigious, highly selective elite school, you're expected to find your mate there. Only black folk, and to be brutally frank, black women, only they kind of buck that trend and then want to present it as if it's the blue collar brothers' fault, it's Pookie and Ray Ray's fault, it's the get down low fault. No, everybody's fault but theirs. Because again, white women do it, Asian women do it, Jewish women do it, and truth be told, quite a few black women do it. Who did Michelle Obama get with? Who did Ralph Richard Banks' wife? Her name is Jennifer Eberhardt. She's a very prominent sociologist. They did it. The simple truth is that a lot of black women, when they go, either they're unattractive and or, it's not always both, they're either unattractive or they didn't make getting a husband a priority. Those are the main reasons. 83% of high-value black men have a black wife. 83% of black men who make over 100 grand a year have a black wife. That's a fact. 83%. So again, if the women of Ketanji Brown Jackson and Kamala Harris's class didn't get a black man in school, whose fault is that? Who?
Okay, I'm a follow up. I'm gonna try to follow up after Obsidian.
Okay, so Mr. Z, real quick, I want to give a shout out to Matthew Gaines with the 10 on the super chat. I see thanks for an honest assessment of a disingenuous article. Also, guys, if you're on here, get those likes up. Also send some love and support through the super chat. Also, you can find me on Cash App or Venmo, Shay Charday. Now you can continue, Mr. Blackneffect. I just wanted to make sure.
So I'm gonna try to follow up after Obsidian. Goddamn. But no. So let's talk about what's going on, right? Your friendly neighborhood white racist capitalists has gotten word that sisters are desperate for representation with white men, and so they're gonna fill y'all with all of that donuts until y'all explode. Now, whether the numbers actually reflect that is going to be a different conversation, right? But everything from the Black Bachelorette to this new show, The Courtship, to Something New, to Scandal, to How to Get Away with Murder, they're going to continue. Now, we understand that when you control for married black women, it's 12% of interracial marriages. When you don't control for just married black women, it's 4% of interracial marriages. Now, all these television shows that are coming out overrepresenting interracial relationships with black women is just for y'all egos. And because white racist capitalists decided if this is what they want, then we're gonna fill them up with it. And don't let it be lost on y'all what Biden said in that supposedly leaked tape with the civil rights leaders, right? He said, look at all these biracial commercials, trying to say like everything's fine and dandy now because, there's so many interracial commercials or biracial commercials going on. And then what do we get? Well, before that, he was obviously, Kamala was already his VP, white husband, Ketanji, white husband. I don't think that's not a coincidence. Susan Rice, when it was Barack Obama, white husband. That's not a coincidence, right? So that's number one. Number two, it's very interesting that we're pushing this message as marriage rates go down around the Western world anyway. So if I'm to understand this correctly, interracial marriage rates are going to increase for black women as the marriage rate for the entire Western society decreases. Is that what we're saying? Number one. Number two, this is a class issue, but race is class in America. So that's one of the issues a lot of black women are running into. It's not your loyalty, it's called racism, right? You could call it loyalty all you want, but anti-blackness is anti-blackness. And your education and your little bit of money, your 70, 80 grand a year that you think is, $250,000 or 500,000 is not gonna fix that. Your college degree is not gonna fix that. We understand it, and I hate to say it, I hate to be so on the nose with it, but it's not black women's loyalty to black men, as you said earlier, Shay Shawty. It's white racist men. If they really wanted to wife up black women, they've had legal access to black women for over 50 years, since Loving versus Virginia in 1967, right? And I'm not saying that to like beat up on black women. As you said earlier, if this should have really been dedicated or angled at white men, but we understand white men ain't budging. They're not moving. So
Right.
it's it's almost that Jodie Turner Smith type thing that we're telling black women to do. Go chase after the white man, go get pregnant from him, then go propose to him. That's what we're telling black women to do. So we're telling black women, yeah, black men. Essentially, what they're saying is black men don't want to step up and be men, but white men ain't really checking for y'all. So go take on the role of the man chasing after white men.
But that's what Jodie, what's her name, did anyway.
Exactly.
Right?
That's exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. It's like that. You hit the nail on the head where it's like, why wasn't this addressed to white men, which it should have been if we want to have an honest discussion? Because, I mean, most men in general, apart from racism, I think most men in general just prefer to date and marry their own women because a lot of men want to have kids that look like them. Like, this
BGS put out the, Shay, and Obsidian know about BGS too. BGS put out the video where he spoke about the it was a page in one of Bell Hooks' books where she straight up said the issue is white men are too racist. Bell Hooks told y'all straight up it would be great. As a matter of fact, the best way to fight racism in her mind, at least, was if white men would accept black women because women adopt the status of the men. The problem is that white men are too racist. Bell Hooks told y'all that straight up.
I don't think it's racist.
See what I'm saying?
I don't think a preference is racist.
I don't
think preference is racist. I'm not saying that. I'm saying white men, if they wanted to, they've had white men clearly show you what they into when they marry out. It's Asian women. They've clearly shown the whole entire world what it is, right? And like, I think black women are really trying to class their way out of racism, white supremacy, anti-blackness, and it ain't working. So they're throwing a fit. And so when they see articles like this come out, it like you said, it's pandering. But I think black women want the pander. It's almost like, I don't care if you're pandering. I just want to feel something good. I want to hear something good.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because there's a sister in that room named Marissa Lachelle, and she says, this is so disgusting. So you as a black woman are saying, I think she's referring to you, Miss Sade.
Oh,
so you as a black woman are saying that black women who are overweight don't deserve love. Well, this is what I would say to that. This is what I would say.
I got something for that too, Obsidian, after you.
This will be my response to that statement. No, you don't. You don't deserve anything. Deserve got nothing. I'm quoting a black woman now, Snoop Pearson from The Wire. Deserve got nothing to do with it. This isn't a competition or a race where everybody gets a participation trophy for just showing up. Mating is ruthless. There's nothing nice about it. There's nothing fair about it. It's cutthroat. I mean, it is what it is. If you fail to offer that which the opposite party wants, you fail. That's true for men and women alike.
I agree.
And we've done women, black and white, but since we're doing focus on black women who are highly educated, because that's who Banks is talking about, we do them no favors by continuing to lie to them. That's the reason why I wrote the book of Obsidian, Ladies Edition, because it's high time somebody told black women the truth. If you're a black woman and you lack that which the opposite sex, and let's be honest, you ain't checking for all of them, you checking for the high value ones. Let's be honest here. If you lack what they want, you lose. Period.
Not complicated. That's not racist. That's not fat-phobic. That's not, misogynist. Is to your point, men have preferences. And no, you don't just deserve something just by the nature of you being existing. We don't use that language for men. If a man said, oh, well, I deserve a model, we would all laugh him out this room.
Yep.
But somehow as women, we deserve this Prince Charming just by nature of us being born without doing any work. And that's not being an adult. To me, that's being a child.
Not only that, here's what's even worse. If you're a black woman that Banks is talking about, and you're highly educated at an elite university, and you didn't get your man while you were there, you're dumb. If you went to a Harvard, a Yale, a Northwestern, a MIT, a Stanford, and you didn't get your boo while you were there, you're dumb. Flat out.
let's call a thing also, Obsidian. Okay, we, like Shay said earlier, this is not the first iteration of this swirler divester thing. It's just a new name for an old thing, you know, a lot of black women been trying for decades. But with this iteration, with the internet, you know, I'm gonna give it 20 years. You know, Obsidian, you're older than me, but not, you know, by a significant amount. We should still be alive in 20, 25 years. Let's see if this divester swirler thing actually produces numbers. We understand it's not, but you know, just to give black women some space, let's see if it to produce numbers, right? If you're begging, and this is the thing I think a lot of women like Shay Sade have an issue with. It looks so desperate, like she said. It comes off really begging. It comes like you're begging non-black men to be with you, but not for love. And I want to be very clear to the young lady: you're not asking for love. You're using white men and non-black men as a status symbol, and everybody knows it. I don't know if you realize that everybody know. It's almost like these type of sisters think everybody's dumb. Like everybody knows that you're using white men and non-black men as a status symbol. So please stop talking about this love thing. Nobody believes you. Nobody believes you, bro. So like, could we call a thing a thing? You have an issue with black men, and you want to use white men to snub black men and use them as a status symbol. Unfortunately, believe it or not, white men know. Right, number one. Number two, most of them are not interested in. When I say most, I don't mean like 51% most. I mean like 95% most, right? Are not interested, number one. Number two, you're gonna still run into the wall of anti-blackness. I don't know how many black women have straight up said, I've dated white men and it started getting serious and they family X'd it, right? Or his granddad said, you ain't getting out $1 from me if you stay with her. Or we were together and we were having sex and everything was good for a year and a half, and he's just dropped me. Like,
you know what's fascinating? You know what's fascinating about this whole arc of this, you know, divestment. That's the new word these days. That's the new wrinkle. Used to be swirling, now it's divestment. You want to know what the really interesting thing about this is? For the black women for whom it applies, they never openly and consciously ask themselves, what do the most elite white, Jewish, and Asian women do? What do they do? I mean, they get married. Okay, great. How did that happen? Where did they get married? I mean, where did they find their mate? How did that happen? When? At what point? At what age? What were they doing? They never asked those questions. Never. Black folk have an aversion, and this is true of black men too, but we're talking about black women. Black folk have an aversion to success because we do not want to learn what other people did to be successful. And this is another reason why I say Banks and people like him do black women for whom it applies no favors. If we're really serious about these ladies pairing off, then you have to ask about their college years. What happened? What happened? You're telling me that there were no black men where you went to school? None. Zero. That's what you're telling me.
No, Obsidian, they're going to tell you that they were all chasing after white women.
We know that's not true because look who Obama wound up with. Now, Hill Harper, yeah, I'll grant you that. Fine. But the majority of black men who go to high post schools marry black women. I'm sorry, that's just the truth. 83% of successful. There are 2.5 million black men in the upper class here in the United States. The vast majority of them are married to black women. Fact.
You know, it's interesting. For every situation that a woman can point to where a black man was chasing Becky, I can point to a black man that said, hey, the black woman I was checking for, the ones that I wanted to date, they didn't want me back. They were dating guys who weren't in college. They were dating hustlers. They were dating, I know, countless men, countless black men in school studying to be doctors, lawyers, engineers, right? Talking about the black, they didn't want us. They didn't find us interesting. They were going for dudes who weren't even in college.
Can I actually speak to that, Shay? Because I want to flip this a little bit on its head for you and Obsidian. Y'all asked for equality, ladies. So what's wrong with being the primary provider? Wait a minute. Wait a minute. You asked for equality. So if you have equality in the jobs, and you're increasingly having that in the job market, how do you think you're still going to keep on marrying up? Has anyone ever played musical chairs? How do you think you're going to? How are you supposed to take half the jobs or half the great jobs and then still be marrying up? It just makes no sense. Or marrying on your level. No, you're going to have to do like men do, which is sometimes you marry up, sometimes you marry equal and across, and sometimes you air quotes marry down. This aversion to air quotes marrying down, and let's be very clear. Like Obsidian said, this is a very class-based argument. The vast majority of black women are not making as much as their male counterparts.
Well, no.
Go ahead.
We have to keep the focus on what Banks is talking about. Banks is
Yeah.
talking about elite. So,
Yes.
so the question here is,
Mhm.
what happened in your? We'll use Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Mhm.
We'll use her for a moment. So for a sister that's like that is who Banks is talking to. My question would be, what happened during your Harvard years? You mean to tell me there were no brothers at Harvard that you could have gotten with? None. All the brothers at Harvard were checking for Becky. That's what you're telling me. You're telling me all the black men that went to Harvard were checking for Becky. All the black men that went to Northwestern were checking for Becky. All the black men that went to Stanford were checking for Becky. Columbia, University of Pennsylvania, Dartmouth, Duke. That's what you're telling me.
But Obsidian, we already know that the level of arrogance and anger and resentment that some of these sisters have, they would say that. They would say all these brothers are colorist, and all of them, if they're not colorist, they were checking for white women. And I understand why you're asking the question. It's not lost on me, but I'm just, just to clarify, like, yeah, they would say that. We're dealing with a level of, and you see this with certain college educated black women. That education, when it comes to speaking about sex and relationships and interracial marriage and all that stuff, that their delusion, upscales their education. That education go out the window when they start talking about relationships. So yes, they would make that argument and look you straight in the face, bold in the face, and say it. Yes, when I was at Harvard, when I was at Duke, when I was at Notre Dame, all the black guys were checking for white women or light skinned or racially ambiguous black women. Yes, they would say that.
No one have to explain why Michelle Obama got married off. Jennifer Everhart got married off. All these dark-skinned sisters got married off. They went to good schools too. What happened? What happened when you were in school? A lot of black women don't want to admit they didn't make it a priority. Period. They didn't make it a priority.
And if I can make one more argument before Big Truck goes, if we're gonna make the weight argument like the sister made, the one that was in school with Barack and Hill Harper. If you're going to tell me that black men have an issue with weight, when we understand black men are the most body positive men on the planet, then you got to explain to me this level of delusion. Let me get this right. Black men got an issue with black women's weight, and white and Asian and Latino men don't. I got to stop right there. I'm a pause. Go ahead, y'all. Go ahead.
I will say, and then I'll let Kevin C speak. I will say again, as a black woman who comes from a long line of educators and knows many educated black women, and we've had these conversations. No, we were not told to make that a priority. Many of us were told, take your time. You know what I mean? Some people were out doing the party thing. Even if you weren't doing the party thing, it was not, we weren't raised like that. Many of us were raised to know how to take care of ourselves. So in the event that we don't find love, we'll still be okay. Or if we do find somebody but it leaves you, he'll still be okay. I mean, that's just a tenet, I feel like, of black culture. So it's like, can we just be realistic about the fact that usually a girl who did bring somebody home and it's serious and it's young, it's like, are you ready? Are you sure? You're kind of young. Do you know yourself yet? Those are the kinds of things that we heard. So that's what I'm saying. I don't have no problem with that. If you want to wait, fine. But then why all of a sudden do we make that choice and then it becomes man's fault? Even the article, he was talking about how, one of the reasons that black women essentially have a higher divorce rate, the way he framed it, it was because of men. It's men's fault that black women have the highest divorce rate. Although we know black women initiate divorces more, but it's men's fault.
And here's to back you up on that, Sade. I would go along with the argument, with the premise that men are the reasons why a lot of black women want out of the relationship or the marriage. I should say the marriage. And they file. Here's the problem with that. Black women have very similar rates of breakup and divorce with lesbians. How do you explain that?
Wait, you're saying they have? Oh, you're saying even if they do or they don't marry, just in general?
That it was when they marry, because now black, lesbians can marry now. People that are gay lesbian can marry.
I see what you're saying.
So when black women who are lesbians marry, they have the same rates of divorce there too. How do you explain that?
Well, it's the man's fault.
How?
because
I see what you did there, Shay.
they fell in love because men weren't available. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of ideas. Somehow it's going to be the man's fault though. Because men weren't stepping up. Men were making enough money. Men were interfering in their relationship. Somehow it has to be the man's fault. I haven't figured out how, but once you find an idea,
Shay, watch this. It's our fault for the high ass domestic violence rate in the black lesbian couples relationships too, right? Oops.
Shut up.
No, because they do have very high rates of it. I mean, when you examine it, black lesbians have the same rates of intimate partner violence than they do with men. And you do notice the black feminists will never admit that.
I thought it was higher. The report.
It's higher.
It was a little bit higher among same-sex relationships.
So whose fault is it now? It's men's fault. How?
I haven't figured it out, but once I figure it out, I'll let you know. I just know.
I like to, before you go to Kevin, I just like to read this. KT says, but who are they being black men, cheating on with their black wives, though Obsidian? I'm sure most of these race-loyal black men got them a white or Latina side piece. Actually, I've studied infidelity. I write about it very extensively.
Black
in
women.
my brand new book, the Book of Obsidian, the ladies edition. I devote 2 entire chapters to cheating. And it is true that among American men, black men cheat the most. That's a fact. Here's the trick, though. When they do cheat, you know who they're cheating on with? Other black women.
Fact.
It's not white women and Latina women and all that. You know who they're cheating on with? Other black women.
Who oftentimes know.
Yeah. So there you go.
Kevin C., I want to give you a chance to speak before we wrap this up.
Yeah. Hey, how's everybody doing? Oh man.
Hey.
And I forgot I want to say Mr. Z. And,
How you, bro? This I understand Obsidian's in here. I get it. But come on. I'm fucking with you. Go ahead.
So I'll say this. I like how you framed this, or actually I like how you presented this initially, because the framing for this is always wrong. That's the one thing that really gets me, is that we always frame this as if we have 100% ready, available black women ready to marry, who are single, childless, fit and in shape, friendly, nice and ready to go. And that's just not the way it is. That's not what's happening out here. It's always framed incorrectly, and it's always framed as if somehow men are the problem. And I'm not saying that we don't have issues on our side, but we can't frame this in a way that makes it seem like the women are perfect either. And that's not me disparaging the women. That's not me saying that they're bad. And that's not me saying that, that they're full of issues and problems. I'm just saying that we know that there's flaws on both sides. We're not going to sit here and say that all the men are, ready and available for marriage and they make good partners. So we can't say that for women. So, that's the framing of it that always bothers me. And then the other part to this too is literally Ralph Richard Banks talks about it in his article. He actually uses the word paucity. And I don't know if he put that in there because people don't know what that means. But when I see stuff like that, I look at it. Paucity, dearth, or dearth, not dearth, but dearth, meaning that there's a low amount. Right. And I'm like, look, how are you going to create a problem based on a system that you created that economically disenfranchises a specific group of men, and say that they're having problems and all this other stuff and everything else, create a problem that's based on racism, that's systemic, that's institutional, and then say, you know what, hey, we don't have any solution for you, but hey, we got a solution for the women though. You see what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, you make a really good point, Kevin, because I picked up on that point, the premise. Okay, so if racism is the reason why this state of affairs exists, then what happened with the civil rights leadership?
Well, just eradicate the racism.
Were they there to address those racism problems?
Absolutely.
You have so many black men that are failing. What happened to the civil rights leadership, which is headed up by black men? What happened?
Well, we can't give you reparations, but we could give you this white penis.
Well, here's the deal. Just eradicate the racism. Just get rid of that. But instead of doing that, we just say, look, here's a problem that we created. Now we got a solution, not for you, but for the women. But instead of eradicating the actual system, that's the problem. You see what I'm saying?
Well, and what was so strange to me is how he uses that as the premise. It's like, okay. And then he says, now go marry the very people that created the issue that you're in.
Yeah, they know the issue better than we do.
And I'm like, what? Like, how was that? Like, it just, the logic was not there. And I'm like, I just saw so many things where I was like, I had cognitive dissonance. And I'm like, this coming from a Stanford professor. Yeah. I don't know that he actually believes this. So I'm like, did he even write this article? Did he, someone
No, he wrote it because it's similar to other stuff that I read on him. But the thing is that that's a dishonesty in all of this. This is what makes us look at academics with a side eye, because they leave information out. And that's why
lie by omission.
Like the old man, that's why we need people like, at the ground level. This is where the grassroots are important, because the grassroots be like, look, I'm sitting here telling you that this is what's happening. You're completely leaving that out. You're dismissing this altogether, and you're eliminating that as a factor, and you're putting the blame someplace else, and you're misrepresenting the situation. So that's what's happening across the board. So, I mean, and the other thing too is, I'm gonna tell you what this is giving me, and I hate to say it, it's giving me like, hey, our population is falling, it's decreasing. The women on our race, they're not doing what we're supposed to do. We need to bring more people in. That's the vibe it's giving me. Like, we need replacements.
I mean, Obsidian, if I'm not mistaken, you said his wife is a sociologist?
That's right, Jennifer Eberhardt. That's correct.
Okay, so come on. I'll put my neck on the line. I'll say it. Yeah, he wrote it. She wrote it. Get the hell out of there. Your wife. This is some Will Jada stuff, y'all. I'll go out there. I'll say it. I don't need anybody to back me up on this. His wife is the sociologist. He's a law professor, and yet he's the one who wrote this piece. Yeah, nah. Well, I don't buy it.
He puts his name to everything, so he's gonna be the one that takes the heat. And but like I say, we already know that my thing is that we black people as a collective are not getting married at high enough rates. Basically, when you look at it on both sides, black men and black women, it's a 30% marriage rate. All right. Now we do know that when people do get married, 80% of us are actually marrying each other. So, and by the way, and it came out in the chat. So let me make this clear. Let me be clear. I do have a black wife, y'all. I don't know how that, got some traction, but I want to go ahead and squash that right now if that becomes a problem. But
I have a black girlfriend.
Yeah, she just happens to be from another country, but she's Afro-Latina. That's all that is.
Nope, my girlfriend is straight black American.
I'm glad you said that, because there's a sister in the chat room named Amethyst Stone. She said you could make the argument that SYSBM, who marry white women, married the daughters of the men who created the white system, thus making the system creator their father-in-law. And excuse me, my response to that is what you just said, Kevin. My experience of brothers who deem themselves SYSBM, they tend to deal with black women. They're just not Adolf's black women. They're Afro-Brazilians or Afro-Latinas from the diaspora for the most part. You have some that marry, continental Africans. But the majority that I personally know, there are a few that marry white. There are a few that marry Asian. But the vast majority that I know, they're marrying like Afro-Brazilians and stuff. And of course, we all know Brazil boasts the largest percentage of African descendant people outside of Africa itself. So no, the swirling thing, as the ladies define it, is a white thing, and you ladies are going to have to hold that L for those it applies. That's why SBM brothers, by and large, want sisters. They just don't be American ones.
Well, go ahead. I do want to address a point that you made as it relates to young black boys and how they're coming up. Okay, so and you're right, Obsidian. There is an issue as it relates to how the problems that young black boys are having. As it relates to reading, development, and all this other stuff and everything too. And yeah, we do have to put that on the women, but the other part too is we have to add the men into that, and we have to add the absent fathers. But the problem is that, so the question that becomes, if why women dealing with men who don't want to be husbands, who don't want to be fathers, who don't want to be part of their children's lives. Because when this is always talked about, it's always framed as, hey, look, well, yeah, blame the father. Well, yeah, okay, yeah, we got to blame that guy, but that guy's not there. Then the question becomes, so why'd you even involve yourself with that guy at all? That's really the question that I have. And you know what? When I get into these chat rooms and, I don't say I'm really confronting women on it, but I'll ask them and I'll go, well, so if these guys are not interested in being married, they're not interested in being fathers, then why would any women deal with them at all? Why are they producing children? Why are these guys even having a chance to get access, sexual access, and then actually being blessed with children? Why are women even doing that? And no woman to this day can really give me a solid answer on that. They just give me there's a lot of explaining going on. I call it explaining, right? They're woman explaining or whatever it is they do, but no one can give me an actual legitimate, logical answer that makes sense, that bare bones. When if those guys are bad, just leave them alone. That's like me going up to a bunch of women and going, you know what? She's toxic, she's toxic, she's toxic. Let me pick one of these toxic women, marry her, create children with her, and then blame all the problems that I have with her on her.
Right.
Or on the women. And I'm like, no, they'll put that on the man. And so yeah, the absent father, he's responsible, but at the same time, the idea is, why is he even in the picture in the first place? You see what I'm saying? Yeah. Shay, does that make sense?
Is she there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That makes total sense.
Yeah, so I mean that's just how I look at it. Because remember, and I think we can all agree that, and I hate to say this about women, but they look at things from a more emotional standpoint versus men. We have to look at it from a common sense, logical standpoint, to include conducting a risk assessment. All right, and you talked about it, Shay, that the availability of men. We know that at least 60%. We know at least 60% of Black men are middle class or better. We know that at least 50% or 50% actually or more don't have children. We know that out of that 50 to 60%, they don't have criminal records. So those three things right there. Now, we're not talking about character. We're not talking about looks and then all this other stuff and everything else. But those are the things that I say disqualify you. You see what I'm saying? Like the major disqualifiers: children, not having any kind of financial way to support a family, and then just having just being an all around, just a repetitive criminal to the point where you're just irredeemable and we really can't do anything with you and we just kind of have to write you off. We don't want to do that, but at the same time, because there have been men that have come through the system and they've actually been redeemable and they get back into society, and that happens. But we do have a portion of them that it's just not going to work out, and that's just what it is.
High,
I would say those are the guys that women don't need to mess with. But you will look at those guys and they'll have 3 and 4 kids sometimes, and then you ask why, and no one can give you an answer to that.
Go ahead, Peter. I'll go up there.
Yeah, Sade, I wanted to jump back to a point you made a minute ago. I had no idea that your father was a teacher at was a professor rather at UC Berkeley. I had no idea. But I want to jump back to the point you made a little while ago. You said that you happen to know Black women that are highly educated, elite educated, so forth, and that you could confirm what I was saying, that many of those ladies simply didn't, or I'm not saying they didn't do it, they heard from other presumably female family members, I presume, that not to make getting a husband while you're at college or shortly after graduation a priority, that you should live your life, you should experience things, this, that, and all that sort of thing, and then settle down. Now, it's interesting, there's a brother in the chat room named Christian, and he says to Lady Muse, what the manosphere has uncovered is many women have had 2 or 3 engagements, and he goes on from there. Now, there have been studies done on poor women. So now we're not talking about Ralph Richard Banks's wheelhouse anymore, which are elite educated Black women. We're talking about poor bottom of the barrel women who have gotten 2 and 3 marriage proposals and they turn them down. My source is Promises I Can Keep: Why Poor Women Put Motherhood Before Marriage, 2005, Eden and Cephalus. Okay? So the question has to be again, and I would be very curious if you would be so inclined to discuss it. If not, I understand. But something tells me that the women in your family that very highly educated, they had at least 2 guys that wanted to marry them. Whether they did it or not is another question, but they did want to during and shortly after their college years. Am I right?
Well, I'll say, my mom's a teacher. Obviously, she married my dad. Same with my nan. So there's a lot of women in my family that are married.
Yes.
There are also many that are not. I can be honest and say that, at least in my own personal life, and some of this wasn't even family. Some of this stuff was even stuff that I was hearing from church, different quote unquote
church.
Wow. I was hearing in church, right? Whether it's wait on the Lord, wait on God. You go to singles ministry, and it's overwhelmingly women, overwhelmingly Black women,
right.
And so I can't even put all this on my family. Like I said, there's a lot of stuff, even just people that I knew from churches, from communities, who were doing that. And I can think of right now the church that I grew up in that was filled with a lot of single Black women to this day who are still there singing in the choir, never been married, have a kid or two, and if I just think of anecdotally in my own experience, I can't even just say it was my family. Like I said, that's why I say I'm like, in our community, this is a very general, I think, talking point. And to deny that, I think, would be to just completely overlook how we have embraced feminism in the different ways it has impacted our life and the ability to go to school and get, scholarships and grants. Like, at that point, we would have to be dishonest.
Yeah.
I wanted to, because I wanted to add this, and it's very important. I said it earlier. I really want to drive this point home, which is, we're being loud about this now, and which is stripping us of plausible deniability. And I want Black women to understand the psychological position you're putting yourself in by screaming from the mountaintop that this is what you're going after. When, I didn't say if, when it doesn't work in the next 20, 30 years, right? When you're in your 50s and your 60s, and we have your comments documented online of what you said when you were 25 and 30 years old about how you're gonna get a white dude or a Latino dude. Do you understand how dumb you're gonna look? Straight up. How? Because there is no plausible deniability. You put it out there in the world that this is what you were going for. And when you have the mixed kid and no marriage, or no mixed kid and no marriage, do you understand that you would have stripped your own self of plausible deniability because you would have failed in your mission of landing this mythical, magical white man, right? So like, I'm really driving this home because this is the first time we understand that sisters have been talking this type of stuff for literal decades, but it wasn't on this level, and we didn't have it recorded on this level. Now we're having it recorded on this level, and it's damn near becoming a religion. And the problem, not for Black men, but for Black women, is now you and your daughters and your nieces, right, y'all gonna have to live with what it means to have said this in the 2020s and then not have anything to show for it in the 2030s and 40s. And I really want to stress that because, I don't think human beings are built to deal with this type of like, I have this delusion, and then reality comes and punches me in the face, and I just eat it. Quite frankly, I don't think human beings, if you feed yourself delusion for 2-3 decades, and then reality hits you in your 50s and 60s, I don't really see how sisters deal with it. I think they're going to be cracking and breaking all over the place in the next couple of decades. And that's not something I'm wishing. That's something I foresee. And I don't know how y'all feel about that.
Do you think that that's one of the reasons that Karazin dipped out? He's like, hey, I'm done with this or she's taking a back seat because she's seeing where this is going? I think that's a fact.
I think Crystal and Karazin dipped out. First of all, because of the white man that said the N-word. Secondly, because she got divorced from her white husband. Third, because it's very clear that her level of anti-Black misandry has escalated past her, right? So Crystalline, for all her negative, and she was toxic and is toxic, she wasn't necessarily advocating for aborting Black sons. Then Cynthia G came and put the bar up there. Now there's new divestors that took that bar, and now you got to walk in the door on divestment advocating for aborting Black sons. Or because divestment is Black women realizing that swirling, which is exclusively dating out, wasn't working. So now divesting is their selfish way of saying, well, I'm not completely against Black men, but I'm going to divest the majority of my energy out. Now, when they actually talk, they still sound like neo-Nazis, but a part of them understand that white men ain't really checking like that. So they still reserve the right to hopscotch back and forth. So answering your question in a shorter way, Crystalline just realized that the game got ahead of her. She's not on. She's bad, but she wasn't on this now new neo-Nazi level of divestment. Yeah, it's gotten past her now. That's what I'll say to that.
Right-wing movement of itself. Hey, I'll say one more thing, and then I'll just kind of fade into the background for a little bit and just listen for everybody else. But my concern out of this, well, there's a couple of concerns. One of my concerns is just not Black men, but white men are getting the wind of this. They see this. I'm telling you, this article just popped up. I didn't even have my phone, but it just popped up in my phone. The article you just went over, Shay, it popped up in my phone. It's all over my doggone internet. It's everywhere. People are talking about it. So white men are seeing this too. And if I'm a white man, and I want to play a little game here, and I want to, take advantage of this situation, and I see where this is going, then I'll, go ahead and use the women I'm going to use and have the fun I'm going to have, and do what it is I'm going to do, and then when I'm ready to get married, I'll go ahead and get somebody from my race.
Kevin C, don't leave yet, because I got something to say to that. So when Issa Rae put in her book, and she actually said it on Wilcox's show, and Obsidian already know I'm going with this, that Black women should open their dating options up to Asians, right? So I was scouring the internet, and I was on Asian forums, kind of peeking in. Asian men were not with it, and they were not with it, and they kept on saying over and over again. First of all, they didn't find Black women attractive like that, but they said, I'm not going to be second place. In other words, you're only doing this to spite Black men, and they were straight up saying that shit. I'm not making that up. Asian men. So what you're saying is 100% true. A lot of sisters act like the internet is a thing that's kind of segregated off. They think when we talk about Black Twitter and Black YouTube, like you got to put in a special code to read our shit. It doesn't work that way. So these non-Black men they do understand what's going on. And if they got a little chocolate tooth, they got to run through pretty much. And this is my fear. And I actually kind of worry about, I'm not joking, I'm really worried about Black women with this, is like, you're putting a target on your back. And I don't think you understand, like however bad you think Black men are, you gotta understand why white men ran the planet. And you just told those dudes how desperate you are for their validation. And I just don't think it's wise. And I don't think this article is wise either. It's not smart. It's really not.
Right. I agree more. I mean, I couldn't agree more. And, I would love to continue this conversation. I actually have to get ready to leave pretty soon. I'm supposed to be taking my mother-in-law out for birthday dinner, or else I would continue with this. But I also want to say this, and I'll wrap it up briefly. If you guys want to have any closing thoughts after, when we go back to this whole topic of, whether or not if a woman divests, right, or she whether she decides to marry or date out, at the end of the day, you have to be an asset. Men are looking for assets. So whether you decide to date and marry a Black man, or you're like, no, I don't want to deal with them, I'm going to marry out. If you are having issues dating and marrying a man with your own ethnic group, then it's probably you. It's probably you. There's probably something going on, some character trait, maybe some character flaws, something that is making it to where you're having an unsuccessful relationship with men in your community. And that's not necessarily going to make you a prize or an asset for somebody else. Good women, good, lovely women have no problem finding love, whether it's love from men in their ethnic group or men outside the ethnic group. Like I said, I know plenty of women, close friends of mine, who married out, and they're living their life. They're good women. They have good character. They're beautiful. They're in shape. You know what I mean? They take care of themselves. So this wasn't a problem. They're not flying their husbands around as a trophy. They're not bashing Black men. They happen to fall in love with a man of a different ethnic group because they have the qualities to be a wife. And so I think we have to really be honest about, if you're having so many issues with men, then you do need to be introspective, and you do need to make sure that isn't you, especially if you're the common denominator in all of those situations. So that I just kind of wrap it up and say that I don't know if you guys have anything else you want to add.
I'll be the first one, because I think Obsidian and his torch setting ass should be the last one. Right? So I'll jump out and say, to Miss Cardio Queen, when you spoke about Asian women in the comments, I'll say this to you, and it's no insult to you. Shay, you remember the number of Asian men that are married to Black women? Do you remember that number?
Less than 1%. I think
it was 0.25%. I think you said.
Yeah.
Something like Miss Cardio Queen. I just want to say, for me, it's not about bashing Black women. Seriously, it's not. It's that you can't escape this anti-Blackness. You can't. You got to either fix the system or deal with the consequences. But this whole I'm a one-woman army my way out by ending up with a white man in a white racist society, or an Asian man a South Asian man who's colorist on a neo-Nazi level, or East Asian man who's not interested, or Latino man, once again, colorism and racism over there. Like, it's not smart. I understand Black women got their issues with Black men. I get it. But this delusional idea that, some Asian men, 0.25%, you staking your comment on 0.25% of married between Asian men and Black women. It's not smart. And what ends up happening is that delusion, when you take that out in the real world and you get hit with reality, you shatter. You shatter. And I'll pause right there. Thanks for speaking about this, Shay Sade. This gentleman, I don't even want to say he should be ashamed of himself because he's been on this for over a decade now. So he found his niche. The corporations found their niche. They're about to make a lot of money on Black women with this interracial swirler shit and divestment shit. So
Right.
Black women, psychologically prepare yourself because they're about to. If this was a drug, y'all about to overdose. And I'll pause right there. Thank you for having me up.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and say that my concern with this will be, the women that's going to get taken advantage of by what's going on, and I hope they're smart enough to actually navigate this appropriately, so that way, even if it doesn't work out, they don't come back and forth with major issues coming out of this. And again, for me, the ridiculousness of it all is, here, I presented the problem that I've created for you. I'm not going to give you a solution. I'm going to give a solution to the women and the women only, and I'm not going to actually eliminate the problem. That is the ridiculousness of all of this for me. Common sense, bottom line logic. We know what the issue is, we know what the problem is, but instead of doing that and eradicating that, we're going to give you something else. And I'll tell you something else too. Here's the deal. You see the agenda at work here. The idea is to get rid of the men, elevate the women, and then leave them unprotected, so that way you can get rid of them later. That's what it looks like to me. And you can call that conspiratorial. You can say that I also believe in aliens and all this other stuff. I don't, but I'm just saying there are other people who are smarter than me who are talking about this. The best way to destroy and get rid of a community that you no longer lead, that you don't want them around, is to get rid of those men first. Once you get rid of the men, you leave the women and the children unprotected, and now you can eliminate the women too. That's how you do it. It's very simple. So, my concern out of this is there's more. I'm more concerned about the fact that we're not getting married versus who it is we're marrying. Because I know when we do get married, we're going to mostly marry each other anyway. So that's just some things for thought. And Shay, old man, it's nice talking to you guys. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thank you
for calling in.
Yeah, Sade, I want to thank you so much for having me on, and to be continued. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. So this was a fun one. I would continue, but like I said, I do have plans. Also, I did see two more super chats come through. Shout out to Kevin West NKC with the $9.99 on the super chat. I see now more trying to cope and protect them women. I'll say I try not to name call here. Said I did it my whole life only to constantly see ish like this. Save yourself, Black men. We got countless options. I do appreciate the love and support. I do. I saw another one come through. I want to acknowledge. I had it up for some time. I just know we were going. You guys, like I said, my position has been since day one: date and marry who you want. Just don't undermine yourself in the process by talking about your own people group, buying into propaganda. And also, by the way, men are looking for assets. So if you do really want to marry and date out, cool. Fine, but you still need to be an asset. If you want to be with a white man, okay, whatever. You still got to be an asset. There is still going to be a level of competition, and if you've had nothing but failures with all of the men in your life, in your community, have nothing but just struggle, love, failure, I would encourage you lovingly to unpack that, because best believe if you haven't figured out how to work together with people in your own community, it's going to be a whole heck of a lot harder outside of your community, right? And again, this is just assuming you don't end up with somebody or don't connect with somebody that's racist. Mr. Z, has made very good points where it's just like, yeah, we can't act like that doesn't exist. If you do want to act like that doesn't exist, and you do want to just overlook colorism, the texturism, anti-Blackness, all those different things, and you do find someone that you think loves you for you, fine, you still have to be an asset, period. It can't all be men's fault. We have to take accountability for what's going on. And like I said, this pandering at the end of the day is not only is it not helping, it really is making us look desperate. And nobody wants a charity case, period. Nobody wants a charity case. So again, those are my thoughts. Also, shout out to Splatterhouse Tenant. with the 5 on the super chat. I see correction, brother. White men demanded equality. Black women simply jumped on the bandwagon, referring to feminism. Really, really interesting. So again, I appreciate all of you guys. If you like this show, please do like it before you leave and share it with somebody. Also show support. You can find me on Cash App or Venmo. Sade. Stay tuned for upcoming conversations and hot topics. And we'll talk later. Bye.